I was kicked out of my home at the age of 18. First, I really need some advice. I thought I grew up in an ideal family. My parents struggled for 4 years to have children before I was born. Just when they were about to give up, my mother got pregnant, which was like a miracle for the family, I'm told. My parents were very happy to learn of my birth and had many hopes and plans for the future. However, according to what my grandmother told me, this happiness did not last long. Deep down, my parents were not satisfied with each other. They constantly argued fiercely, and the disputes continued even after my mother became pregnant, arguing about the same things every day. My mother strongly condemned my father's gambling habit, while my father blamed her for continuing to drink alcohol all day, even during pregnancy. My father promised to stop gambling if my mother would stop drinking. My mother agreed to this proposal at first, but later broke the promise. My father discovered that my mother was secretly hiding bottles of alcohol around the house and continuing to drink. Believing that my mother's drinking was negatively affecting not just him but also me, my father gave her an ultimatum. It was for her to stop drinking or face divorce. However, my mother refused to stop drinking. She was very upset by the situation, and according to my grandmother, in a fit of rage, my mother hurled abuse at my father and threw a nearby pair of scissors at him. As a result, my father was injured in the eye and had to be taken to the hospital. The doctor diagnosed a partial tear in the cornea, but fortunately, it was treatable, and he avoided complete loss of vision. This incident caused great fear in my mother, and she sincerely asked my father for forgiveness. My father chose not to make a big deal out of the problem and did not sue my mother, as she promised to change. I heard that when I was born, my parents were very happy and tried hard to raise me. According to my grandmother, this peace did not last long for my parents. One day, when my father came home from work, he found me crying loudly in the children's room. Meanwhile, my mother passed out on the sofa, drunk. Seeing this scene, my father became furiously angry and confronted my mother. He blamed the situation, but my mother excused herself, saying, "The stress of parenting is too much, and I just had a little drink." At that time, my father considered reporting the situation to Child Protective Services, but ultimately he refrained. I think things might have been better if he had reported it then. Afterward, my mother changed her behavior a bit, but it was just a way for her to hide it better. In the morning, when my father left for work, my mother would drink and sleep until the evening, making sure it wasn't noticeable. I must have gone many days hungry. As a result, my health gradually deteriorated, and I visibly lost weight. When my grandmother visited, the house was a mess, dishes piled up in the sink unwashed, the floor dirty and sticky, and unsanitary. When my grandmother saw me, I was in dirty diapers and clothes, and my hair was unkempt. When my grandmother pointed out the state of the house and my condition to my mother, she immediately became defensive, saying, "Don't interfere in my business." Moreover, on another day when my grandmother came, she noticed my mother was clearly drunk in the middle of the day. When my grandmother confronted her, my mother couldn't respond properly and kept laughing, talking nonsense. My mother then openly showed her anger, repeatedly insisting it was nothing. At that time, my grandmother decided she could not leave things as they were and stayed at the house all day to take care of me. Later, when my father returned from work, my grandmother asked if she could take care of me for a while. It was to give my mother time to enter a rehabilitation facility. My mother opposed this, but my father quickly agreed to my grandmother's suggestion. I think my father agreed with my grandmother's words because he felt more support was needed in the house while my mother was undergoing treatment. Thus, I ended up living with my grandmother for several months. The days I spent with my grandmother were truly happy and irreplaceable. Every day, she bathed me and read me books before bed. She also made delicious meals and took me to the park. I first learned then that these are things parents should do for their children. When I wanted to play, my grandmother never got angry or yelled like my mother did. Even when I accidentally broke a dish, my grandmother didn't hit me but gently scolded me. The time I lived with my grandmother was a precious time when I could feel completely at ease. Gradually, my grandmother became like a mother to me, and she has been a treasured support ever since. I can only feel truly grateful for my grandmother. I can't imagine how I would have overcome those difficult days without my grandmother. My father also made time to visit me often. Since then, he looked forward to seeing me very much. My mother also often expressed how much she wanted to see me and how she hoped to recover quickly so she could hug me again. To be honest, I was a bit resistant to returning to my parents' home. I wanted to continue living with my grandmother forever if that was possible. However, a few months later, my mother finally succeeded in abstaining from alcohol and earned her AA sobriety chip. The first thing she did was drive to my grandmother's house to see me. When I reunited with my mother after many months, it felt unreal, as if I were meeting a stranger. She seemed healthier than before. After she discussed things with my grandmother, I was told that I would return to my parents' home. No matter how much I cried or resisted, my mother insisted, "I am your real parent, and we must live together." Living with my parents brought back many unpleasant memories, and returning to that life was very hard for me. The move seemed to place a great burden on both my mind and body. Despite being only 5 years old, I lost my appetite and suffered from nausea for days. As a result, I was diagnosed with an eating disorder. Afterward, my parents did everything they could to help me. By receiving family therapy together, we slowly overcame our past pain and moved forward. My feelings gradually stabilized, and a sense of calm returned to my heart. My parents stopped fighting violently as before, my mother completely quit drinking, and they both tried to value their time as a family. My mother began to engage with becoming a better parent, and she started building a new trust relationship with my father. My father also reduced his work hours to spend more time with us. However, one afternoon, when I returned home from school with my father, we encountered an unexpected scene. My mother was in an intimate situation with an unknown man inside the house. We witnessed everything on the spot, and it became a significant trial for our family again. We saw their misconduct and clearly witnessed their actions. At that moment, I was deeply shocked, and my father was lost for words for a while. My mother and her lover tried to hide in a panic, but during this, my father's face turned red with embarrassment. He told me to go upstairs, and during that time, he confronted my mother and her lover. Terrified, the lover rushed out of the house. From inside the house, we could hear my parents arguing fiercely. My mother, being self-centered, excused her infidelity by telling my father that the pressure to be perfect troubled her, and being with her lover made her feel like a normal person. She also expressed to my father that she always felt he would be disappointed, no matter what she did. My father called her a coward and immediately told her to leave the house. At that moment, my mother desperately pleaded, arguing to my father that he shouldn't be so cruel. She argued that they should repair their marriage for my sake. That night, while my parents were fighting intensely, my grandmother came to pick me up. She said a few words to my mother but didn't interfere much. For the next 2 weeks, while my parents sorted out their issues at home, I stayed at my grandmother's house. My mother called every day, showing great concern for me. Looking back, I understand that she was only thinking of herself, without considering anyone else. Whether my father truly loved my mother or had just become too accustomed to a dysfunctional relationship, I don't know, but ultimately he decided to continue living with her under certain conditions. They were to undergo marriage counseling, but despite my father's decision, I could no longer see my mother as before. After witnessing her with another man, I felt like I had completely lost respect for her. For us, it was a situation as bad as one could imagine. Then, just 3 months later, my father was diagnosed with stomach cancer. One day, he complained of severe stomach pain and collapsed at work. He was then taken to the hospital, where his rapidly deteriorating health condition was revealed, and he was told that immediate treatment was necessary. Thus, my father began a life of chemotherapy and enforced rest. He took time off work and was forced into a battle with cancer. My father had some savings, and my grandmother willingly helped my mother, but my mother was not satisfied with that. She constantly complained about the costs of treatment and the financial burden it imposed. My father advised her to find a part-time job and promised to return to work and support her again once he recovered. With limited options, my mother started working as a waitress at a local restaurant. The job involved long hours, and she worked late into the night. During this period, my grandmother drove my father to and from the hospital. The son of a neighbor living next door, who was about the same age as me, offered to drive me to school every day. It was a great help for us. This is how I became close with Sean, who lived in the house next door. We have been friends for a long time and practically grew up together, so Sean's parents knew my family well. Since my parents often had fierce arguments, Sean's parents started inviting me over for lunch and dinner when Sean and I became friends. My father had no problem with it, and neither did I. However, my mother always scolded me for spending too much time at their house, saying they treated me like a mere charity case and like a broken toy. Looking back, she might have had a point, but as I spent more time with them, I gradually realized that they treated me like a member of their family. In fact, once Sean's mom learned that I loved apple pie, she made sure to bake one every weekend. Sean's dad taught me how to play basketball, and we practiced late into the night outside their garage. Over time, they became like a second family to me. Therefore, it was no surprise to anyone when Sean and I started dating. Gradually, Sean brought many wonderful things into my life, and I am grateful every day that he has overcome many challenges and is still my boyfriend. I come from a complex family environment, and unfortunately, my mother has never truly trusted Sean or his family. Yet, Sean and his family showed me love and compassion, regardless of my mother's discomfort. A year after my father's battle with cancer began, he was told by the doctors that the chemotherapy was no longer effective and that he had a short time left. This news was a huge shock to our family. I was still young at the time, and I remember crying all night long, thinking about my father. I could not understand why I had to lose the only parent who loved me unconditionally. Accepting the grief was extremely difficult. During his last few months, my father spent as much time as possible with our family. One morning, when my father didn't wake up no matter how much I called him, I immediately felt something was wrong. I quickly informed my mother, who then called 911. The moment the paramedics announced his death, the pain I felt was indescribable. The only small comfort was that my father had passed away peacefully in his sleep. Overwhelmed by grief, I continued to scream and refused to let them take my father's body away, until my mother finally restrained me. When my grandmother arrived, I felt a bit more at peace. At that time, I could not fully comprehend the depth of grief she was carrying. The funeral went smoothly, but what really shocked me was when the lawyer came to read my father's will. It was then revealed that my father had left all his property to me. My mother was surprised by this news and asked the lawyer to verify the documents. My father understood what kind of person my mother was and left the house and some assets to me after the chemotherapy, presumably to ensure I could start a new life. However, my mother was not convinced and repeatedly asked the lawyer if there was any way to legally dispute that the house belonged to her, as she was the wife. But since my father had legally changed his name quite a while ago, there was no question about his mental state legally, and my mother's claim had no basis. When asked by my mother what I intended to do with the house, I replied that I wanted to stay there. My mother suggested selling the house and moving to a better place. However, I had just lost my father, and the house was the only place where I could feel his presence, so I declined her proposal. In the end, my mother had few options and continued to live in the house. I noticed that my mother seemed very disappointed at that time, but I did not think much about it. However, within 2 months, I was informed by my mother that she was in love with a man named Kevin. It was the man she had an affair with years ago. I was very upset with my mother for wanting to meet him. My mother explained that she had met Kevin again after many years, and she started claiming he was just an old friend. After my father's death, I felt like my mother was always lying to me. They were very close, and seeing them kiss each other made me feel even more uneasy. This incident disturbed me even more. Thinking back on the nights when my mother returned home late, I felt even stronger emotions. Before, I had seen my mother as my ideal role model. However, upset by her words, I told her that he was not necessary in my life, that if she intended to marry, she should move out, that it would be better to live alone than with a man she had an affair with while my father was alive. My mother threatened me, saying that I was still a minor and had no options. Unfortunately, she was right, and I had no choice. After a while, she married Kevin. Furthermore, my mother soon became pregnant with Kevin's child. As if to say it wasn't enough reason for me to dislike him, he was very controlling and would call my mother every time she finished work, and if she was even a minute late coming home, he would call again. He tried to do the same with me, but I quickly rejected it. I made it clear to him that he is not my real father, and that I can go anywhere I want by my own will. By the way, I have the keys to the house, so he can't lock me out. At this point, my mother hadn't done anything special for me. I felt a little sad that my only parent didn't care about me at all. However, my grandmother and Sean's parents supported me and encouraged me until I graduated. Later, while I was preparing to go to a party with friends, my mother came to my room and said that since I was an adult now, I should take more responsibility for the house. I always washed my own things and had thought about and applied to college on my own. Confused, I asked my mother what she meant. Eventually, I was able to attend a reputable local university, so I didn't need to waste money on distant accommodation. However, I wanted to buy a car to make it easier to commute to classes. I thought about asking my mother for help to buy a car, but when I brought it up, she and Kevin immediately became furious. Kevin accused me of already having too much support from them as they both had limited income. Furthermore, my mother and Kevin started renovating the house on their own, interfering with my plans to buy a car. During this time, I said nothing and just sat there quietly. Sean understood that I was upset about the situation with Kevin. He said that as a parent, he should consider his responsibilities. Then, Kevin decided to convert my room into a room for the baby they were expecting. He continued, telling me that I should move out and start living on my own, which left me speechless. Kevin and my mother told me they could no longer let me live in the house. My mother agreed and said I should move out to pay rent and live independently. A few hours later, they told me to leave the house. So I went to consult a lawyer to check my legal rights. The lawyer confirmed that my father's will was very clear and explained that my mother and Kevin had no right to control the house, advising me to issue a formal eviction notice. With the notice in hand, I confronted my mother and Kevin with my grandmother. My grandmother is petite, but was not intimidated by tall Kevin at all. She stared at him and said she had decided to sell the house and instructed them to vacate within 30 days. When shown the notice, they couldn't argue. I handed them the notice signed by the lawyer, emphasizing that the 30-day period must be adhered to, and explained the legal actions that would follow if they did not comply. Kevin, red-faced with anger, snatched the document from me. I stood firm and told my mother about the years she had drowned in alcohol, telling me to fend for myself as a child. I told her that she was the one who should be independent. My mother, with nowhere else to go, begged me to let her stay, but I firmly told her I wouldn't let them do as they pleased any longer. I also told my grandmother and me that we would stay in the house and ensure they moved out within 30 days. Kevin and my mother were unprepared for this and tried to argue, but I did not budge. I reaffirmed to them that I was the owner of the house and they were merely guests. If they were not willing to follow my instructions, I would have all their belongings moved to a motel. The reason I opted for a 30-day grace period was on the advice of my lawyer, to ensure they could not sue me if this issue went to court. I also stated that I was willing to repay the costs incurred in the renovation if they could provide appropriate invoices verified by a lawyer, as I wanted to be fair when selling the house. People have asked why my grandmother and I stayed there with my mother and Kevin, and the reason was to prevent them from refusing to leave or illegally occupying the property without a valid reason when the 30-day legal notice expires. I even outmaneuvered them eventually by moving all their belongings to the porch and locking them out of the house when my mother went for an ultrasound. When they returned and called the police could do nothing. I calmly showed the documents proving I was the legal owner of the house and told them that Kevin and my mother did not even have the keys to the house. After verifying this, the police said they could go to court if they wished. Kevin argued against my points and verbally abused me. Then he began to walk away, yelling loudly. One of the officers warned him that he was a danger to me. Eventually, my mother and Kevin were detained. I was deeply satisfied that I could exclude them from my property and make them understand this fact. After that, I installed surveillance cameras all around the property. Following a meeting with the real estate agent, house viewings were set to start the following week. Afterward, my mother and Kevin tried to contact me several times through friends and relatives, wanting to apologize, but I refused all their messages. After they were taken by the police, I heard they were living in an apartment on the other side of the city. Even after the baby was born, my mother tried several times to reconcile with me. She sent messages with photos of the baby, saying, "I want you to meet the baby," but I knew her actions were calculated. Following my grandmother's advice, I decided not to respond to any contact from my mother or Kevin. Their presence was a source of past trauma for me, and to move forward in my new life, I needed to completely distance myself from them. The house sold for more than expected, and I was able to secure funds for my university tuition and new life. Sean's parents supported me in finding a new apartment. Recently, I heard that my mother has been struggling with alcohol problems again. Her relationship with Kevin hasn't seemed to be going well either. However, honestly, it's no longer my concern. The path my mother chose after my father's death was her own choice, and I am not responsible for it. Currently, I am seriously engaging with Sean and working towards my dreams every day. On weekends, I cook with my grandmother at her house and help with gardening. This is my new idea of family. My relationship with my mother may have ended, but I feel it was the first step towards moving forward into the future. Sometimes I think of my father. I believe he left me the house so I could take back my life. I continue to move forward, hoping to fulfill his wish.